We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? Uh-huh. What was it like? Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Hello listeners, this is Paula Schaffner with episode 45, Looney Tunes and Morkie Melodies. The title is of course a reference to the old Warner Brothers cartoons. This first aired on February 14th, 1980. The IMDb synopsis is, Nelson is given TV airtime to plug his political views on a Saturday morning, so Mork uses the opportunity to put on a kiddie show. This was the 36th Mork Mindy episode directed by Howard Storm, and it's another for the team of Tom Tenowich and Ed Sharlock, their 8th and 10th respectively. We start with the nighttime exterior of the house. Mork opens the door and calls to Mindy. The audience goes crazy. Mindy comes in from her open bedroom door, and there's one squeal for her. She's filing her nails. He guesses that she files them under N for nails. He has a little surprise for her. He opens the front door and rolls in a giant tinfoil ball. This is the tinfoil collection of the kids at the daycare center. He says it kind of looks like a meteor from the planet Alcoa. She laughs and agrees. She says she can't think of a better job for him than being group leader for a bunch of kids. He says he is kind of an expert in the field. Some people think he's rather childlike himself. She says, well, that's news. And of course this is a comment on not only Mork, but Robin Williams, who had a very childlike quality to him at times. Someone knocks. Mork says he'll race her to answer it, and then he laughs triumphantly when he gets there first, although she doesn't even bother to compete. He opens the door to Nelson. This is the first time we've seen this character in over a month since the night they raided Minsky's, and this is, as the synopsis tells us, another episode where Nelson's campaign impacts the plot. He says that that's a nice ball of tin. Mork says, may I take your coat? I've always liked it. And then he does his bark laugh, but he does remove his coat like this is a restaurant or he's playing servant. Nelson says that an interesting development has transpired and he's as proud as a peahen. Again, we're getting gender swapping going on because the phrase is proud as a peacock. I also wondered if maybe it was a reference to NBC. Nelson is going to give a speech on television. Mindy thinks this is wonderful. Nelson takes the speech out of his pocket. He says he worked very, very hard on it. He wanted to get their reaction to it. Mork says it looks nice from here, and it's got a nice crease. He calls it a little albino origami, once again referring to blonde Nelson as an albino. Mindy says she thinks that Nelson wants to read the speech to them, so Mork says, oh, dopey moi, one of his catchphrases. They all sit. Mork is in the stage right armchair. Nelson and Mindy are on opposite ends of the couch. Nelson clears his throat.
What has happened to America? People have been asking that question a lot lately. That's why I've decided to look for a solution. You see, I sense that if there were a solution or solutions, the energy that went into asking that question could be channeled into the search for other solutions to other questions.
So it's no wonder that Nelson's campaign is going so badly. He continues to have no actual positions, and he seems to have no charisma. Mindy calls Mork's name to get him to stop snoring. Nelson says that that was his grabber. He taps Mork's leg. Mork awakens suddenly and says, bravo, author, author. Nelson says he just started. Mindy asks how much longer the speech is. It's a full hour, and so Nelson suggests reading it faster. Mindy is surprised that Nelson got a full hour on TV. Nelson says that his opponents in the upcoming election, it's still not upcoming, I mean, November is ages away, were on a televised debate. Somehow Nelson was snubbed. He suspects that the station manager is like this, and he crosses his fingers, with the other 12 candidates. So a lot of competition. Mindy realizes that Nelson got equal time from the FCC. Mork says, Mindy, you don't have to spell it. We're all adults here, since FCC is close to the F word. The FCC equal time rule for politics in particular began in 1927 with radio. This rule was loosened in the 80s with Ronald Reagan, but it was obviously still in effect in 1980. Nelson says the only snag is that they're going to put him on at 7 o'clock on Saturday morning. Not exactly a primo timeo. Mindy says nobody will be watching except kids. And at that time, Saturday morning television, which really became big in the 1960s, was still going pretty strong and would last, I think, well into the 80s. I mean, certainly in the Smurf era, but with the increase of cable and various other changes, it became less of a ritual. But certainly for later baby boomers and the Gen Xers, Saturday morning TV was part of growing up in America. Nelson hopes that the kids will like what he has to say about America and how to fix her, meaning America, and then they'll tell their parents to vote for him. Mindy says a political speech isn't exactly what kids want to listen to. Mork suggests that Nelson wear a chicken suit, because of course chickens are funny. Yes, this relates to the bird and egg thing of work. Mindy says if Nelson wants kids to pay attention, he's got to talk about something that they're interested in. Nelson doesn't know what kids want to hear. He says hang, and I've never heard hang, but it's sort of like dang, I guess. Hang, it's been years since he was a cute little tyke. Mork says he can help by going to the daycare center and asking the tykes and tykettes what they want to see on Saturday morning. And he does sound effects and Porky Pig. And so we had the thing set up in the opening bit with the tinfoil that Mork is now working at a daycare center. As you know, he's gone through various jobs so far in almost 2 seasons, and nothing is really stuck. The daycare center is a good fit for him, as Mindy pointed out, and we will see much more of it in season 3 with some changes. Nelson appreciates this. He and Mork stand. Nelson puts his arm around Mork and tells Mindy to not let him go. He's a very special guy, and he gives him a playful punch on the chin. Mindy sarcastically agrees. They exchange goodbyes and Nelson leaves. Mork says he was going to take the foil ball up to his attic unless Mindy wanted it as a knick-knack or tchotchke. She says her knick-knack shelf has a 1-ton weight limit. She wonders how he'll get it up the stairs. He said he had no trouble getting it home, except the taco stand at the bottom of the real steep hill now has a drive-through service. He looks guilty. She gets her "Oh, Mork" look. And I just want to mention in the scene she's wearing her University of Colorado shirt, but there's no mention in the dialogue of this episode that she is taking night classes or any reason why she's wearing it in the evening. We get a sunny exterior of a red brick building, and there's colorful playground equipment. And yes, there's snow on the ground. Inside, there's lots of bright colors. There's a basketball, an easel, 5 or 6 anatomy drawings that are emphasizing different organs. There are a couple tables with chairs. There's art on the walls and just various props and set decoration to suggest that this is a fun place where kids can do various hobbies. In this scene and the later scene with the kids, there are 13 of them. They are ethnically diverse, with roughly half of them boys and half of them girls. And I would say the ages are roughly 6 to 11. So we're not talking about preschoolers, and certainly not teens. This seems more like an after-school kind of daycare center. We see a middle-aged woman with sort of a light orangish red dress and light red wavy hair, roughly shoulder length. She walks through and the camera follows her. She tells a white boy named Grant that he's making a nice pine cone turkey. So I don't know if this is set around Thanksgiving or he's just randomly making a pine cone turkey. He says, "Thanks, Mrs. Thompson." A black girl with looped ponytails asks Mrs. Thompson if you can do side moves in checkers. Mrs. Thompson says, "No, Pamela." Pamela says Shazbot, so we learn that Mork has been passing on some Orkin words to the kids. Mrs. Thompson goes over to a white boy in jeans and a striped shirt. His name is Jack, and she tells him that that's an interesting painting. She guesses it's a tree, but it's a portrait of her. She says it does look like her, except for the branch growing out of her ear, and we never get to see the painting, so we just have to imagine it. He says he knew she'd like it. They both laugh. Mork enters through the front door and says, "Greetings, Munchkins." And, of course, this was the first season thing where he would always refer to Eugene as a munchkin, and that is something that he will carry over with the daycare kids. Yes, one of many Wizard of Oz movie references. They all greet him with "Nanu Nanu," and he says, "Ah, shucks and wazoo," which is another of his catchphrases. Mrs. Thompson chuckles and says the kids sure have taken to Mork. He says he likes them too. He'd like to rent one if he could. This, I think, sort of ties in with the thing of Mork wanting children, which is a thread throughout the series. He says he also feels good about helping working moms. So I thought that was interesting that they put that in, sort of a feminist point. Obviously, working mothers are not the only ones who were using daycare, but it did make a difference, and still does, whether or not parents have daycare in their area. Mrs. Thompson says she'll be in her office, and she tells Mork to have fun. And that's the last we see of her, ever. When we get the daycare again, it will be run by a completely different woman. Mrs. Thompson was played by Peggy Pope, who had already started her 5-episode run as Mrs. David on Soap. Later in 1980, she would play Margaret the Lush in 9 to 5. So she was a fairly recognizable face at that time. I think I would have placed her more in retrospect. Mork guesses that Jack is inspired by Picasso. A white girl with brown ponytails, a red sweater, and jeans asks Mork to do that magic trick again. The kids all say, yeah, and he says, all right, no pressure. But we know that Mork is going to enjoy doing this. He goes over to a brightly colored sideboard which has plastic cups, a plate of cookies, and a container of orange juice. He does a little fanfare, and then he makes gurgling sounds as he drinks the orange juice with his finger, and yes, he has the finger burp. The audience and a few of the kids clap. Pamela says she can drink like that too, but with her mouth. And I have to point out that her earlier lines sounded like Kim Fields with the cadence of it, but she doesn't sound like Kim Fields here, so she might have just had a similar acting style. Mork says that that's sleight of tongue. He tells the Munchkins he needs their help. He wants to ask them a few questions if they don't mind. He sits in an empty chair and takes out his notebook. He says a friend of his is giving a speech on TV, and he wonders what they'd like him to say. The red sweater girl says nothing. An older-looking white girl with feathered blonde hair says they get enough speeches at home. Mork asks what they would like to see on Saturday morning. An older-looking white boy who has braces and a baseball shirt says the Dallas Cheerleaders. And no, he does not mention the Bronco Pony Express. You know, they're trying to make that a thing earlier in the season, but here's an older kid who would rather see the Dallas Cheerleaders. Even though presumably Mork could get the Bronco Pony Express on there since he's got contacts. Pamela likes puppets. An unknown kid likes jokes. The feathered hair girl snaps her fingers and says, rock and roll! Preteens were not calling it rock and roll, trying to make her seem relatively hip. There's a girl of about 7 or 8, and she's got a red top with overalls with a schoolhouse on them, and she's got fluffy dark blonde hair. She says she would like to see Dick Cavett interview the Prime Minister of Rhodesia. Mork says, pardon me? And she says a little apologetically, I can't help it, I'm gifted. One of the littlest boys, who's white and wears a tie-dye shirt, confides in Mork that he wants to find out where babies come from. Mork says, if you find out, will you tell me? And the boy playfully punches Mork's arm. So even though we had the thing earlier in the season where Mork was potentially a father, he still doesn't really know anything about conception other than hopefully he doesn't think it has to do with sleeping on the couch. So there are 13 kids, but they are not all credited, and they are mostly not the daycare kids that we will see in season 3. I'm going to guess that Cheryl McRaven is the daughter of writer Dale McRaven, and we have Tom Poston's kids, 10 or 11-year-old Jason, and daughter Hudson, who was 7 or 8, and I'm not sure which of these kids they are. There's also Anthony and Casey Storm, who must be the director's kids, and very obviously Amy and Linda Tenowich are the daughters of this episode's co-writer Tom Tenowich. I don't have the ages on either of them, but Amy is very recognizable as precocious Lola of season 3. The credits say that most of these kids are playing themselves, so I guess her character is named Amy here. Yes, she is the one who wants to hear Dick Cavett's interview. We get another nighttime exterior of the house, and there's definitely snow on the ground. From stage right to stage left, we have Nelson, Mork, and Mindy sitting on the couch. Mork reads from his notes. The kids want to see Nelson juggle, do magic, and tame lions. Nelson says, sure, you have a talent. I can't do nary a thing on this list. So again, Nelson speaks like no living person of the 70s or 80s. Mindy says that Nelson was never the entertainer of the family. Nelson says the last time he got applause was when he used the potty without being reminded. Freudian psychologists take note of this. This may have something to do with him seeking attention through politics, although so far that is not going too well. As he gets up and Mork follows, Nelson says he'd better go with his strength. Dull speeches. If the little rugrats don't want to watch him, let them watch Mookie the mongoose. Mork points out that Nelson doesn't have to fill the entire hour by himself. They and their friends could help. Mindy stands and says she knows some guys in a band, and Remo tells jokes. Mork says that Mindy can sing. We haven't really heard Mindy sing much so far, although she did sing the Laverne and Shirley song on one episode. Mindy says Jeannie dances. She also says that they sound like an old Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney movie. So Mork as Mickey Rooney says, "Hey kids, let's put on a show. With a little inspiration, we can turn the new theater into an old barn." And that was actually the only moment in the episode I laughed, because I liked that little reversal of the cliche. The Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland movies were very old even at this point. That was during his Andy Hardy period of the late 30s into the 40s, and obviously these movies were on TV by this point, and they would have been seen by a baby boomer like Mindy, and presumably Mork watches them along with other television. And I don't think I ever saw any as a kid. I did see a few as an adult, but the cliche was out there in the zeitgeist, and so I recognize that. Nelson thinks it sounds too wacky. Who'd want to watch a bunch of amateurs put on a show? Mork says Peeping Toms would. So one of his suggestive lines he gets in. Mindy says it does sound like a silly idea, but Nelson doesn't know what he's going to do. Mork says he can't give up. He tells Mindy they have to help him. Mindy says they might not have to be that professional at 7 a.m. Nelson says, "Do you really think if I put on a kid show, people would like me?" So again, this isn't just about his campaign. This is some sort of hole in his psyche that he's trying to fill. Mindy says, "Yeah, maybe." Nelson says, "By gum, let's do it. It'll be Nelson Flavor's gift to the children of Boulder." So very clearly it is a local broadcast. Mork says, "Oh, huzzah, huzzah, let's go for the gusto," referring to the beer commercial, I don't remember which one, about going for the gusto. But then Mork realizes he'll miss Mookie the mongoose. Nelson gives him a noogie and calls him a nutty guy. There's another nighttime exterior of the house with snow on the ground. Mindy is now in a blue top, so it must be another night, and they've had enough time to gather together their friends. I want to point out that this is the first episode to feature all 6 cast members who appear in the opening credits. I believe it's the first time we get Mr. Bickley and Nelson interacting, although they don't do much. The couch is pushed back. Mork is standing to the right of it. Mindy is sitting on an arm. Then it's Nelson, Jeannie, and Remo with Bickley in an armchair. Mindy asks who wants to be next. Bickley says he'll give it a try. He juggles 3 balls. The audience claps quietly, and his friends are impressed. And it's like, not really that impressive a juggling act. I mean, not everybody can do it, but it's not that rare. But, he's trying. And the kids did want to see juggling. He says he learned to juggle in the army. He used to do this with hand grenades. He drops a ball, and Mork gets it. Mr. Bickley says that's how he got out of the army. His friends all laugh. He says his catchphrase, "La la la." He sits back down. Mindy says this could be the start of something small. So a reverse of the start of something big. Nelson seems glum, so Mindy asks what's wrong and pats his back. He says everybody's got something nifty to do except him. Mork says if things go well, the kids will think Nelson's the next best thing to dead bugs. Nelson calls him a good buddy. He's glad that he appointed Mork to be the host. Bickley is surprised that Mork is going to host the whole hour. I don't know why. I mean, other than exposition. It's not that surprising. Nelson says Mork has a fine grasp of juvenile attitude performance. Jeannie translates this to mean that Mork knows what kids like. And this is one of these moments where I feel like, okay, this episode is for the kids, except for some questionable Mork humor. It's just aimed at that level. Mork thinks that they'll like it.
Have a beautiful day. Have a wonderful day. Hello, neighbors. Welcome to my neighborhood. Did you like my sweater? It's 10 years old. I got it at the ABC thrift shop. Well, today we're going to learn lots of wonderful things. We're going to learn why cows moo for certain bulls. And the big lesson for today is how to make your cat longer. Can you say meow?
At that time, I don't think there were a ton of Mr. Rogers imitations, but it was definitely something recognizable, and the studio audience is very amused. And I wondered if maybe the ABC thrift shop was a reference to ABC Studio. And yes, we get Mork making a sex joke about why cows moo for certain bulls. Again, Mork mistreating animals as he demonstrates how to make a cat longer. Then we get a vista of a snowy hill with trees, and we zoom towards what I presume is downtown Boulder, but no specific building. So they probably just had just a stock shot and plunked it in there, and we have to assume that the TV studio is somewhere in the vicinity. There's a sign on the wall that says KKGB presents Good Morning Kids. So like Good Morning America. The studio has been decorated with a sun and happy flowers. The kids are sitting on some bleachers that have 2 tiers and they're red. There are 4 beanbags on the floor. There are yellow curtains, and then there's these various vertical stripes. And there's a painting of a tree and a clown holding balloons. And so some of this looks like it was done by the kids, and some of it I figure was just lying around the studio and they borrowed it for this hour. Mork enters in a brown sweater and a long tie, and this is very clearly his Mr. Rogers outfit. The kids clap.
Thank you, Uncle Remo, for those wonderful knock-knock jokes. Weren't those funny, boys and girls? I guess not, huh? Come on over to my neighborhood now. There's someone special I'd like you to meet. Thank you, Mr. Piano Man, for tinkling on the keys. Let's see if my friend's home. Mr. Weasel. I'll see if he's in there. I guess he is. Come on out, Mr. Weasel. Here he is. Hello, Mr. Weasel.
Hi, Mr. Mork. Nice to be on your show.
Yeah. What are you here for today? Why have you come over to my neighborhood?
Because I want to talk to you about a wonderful man called Nelson Flavor.
Well, that'd be wonderful. Let's sit down and chat. We'll talk about it. What's his name, Nelson? Whoa! There goes the neighborhood. Oh, yeah. Well, Mr. Weasel, you'll have to give a big introduction while I scrape the neighbors off my pants. You ready?
Yes, Mr. Mork. Right here on our shift. Let's bring her out here right now. Miss Minnie McConnell. Come on now, put a big hand together, you kids. Yeah.
So we get a more extended version of Mork imitating Mr. Rogers, not for the last time in this episode. I think it's interesting that although the kids wanted jokes, we don't actually hear Remo's knock-knock jokes, and apparently the kids didn't find them that funny anyway. I think the guy at the piano might be John Thomas Lennox. I'm not sure if that's the right name, but he played the piano for Carmine on some Laverne and Shirley episodes. If somebody knows that name, please mention it in the comments. But anyway, he looked familiar to me, although, of course, he's uncredited. And we get Mork making a pee joke at his expense. I want to mention that the kid with the fluffy blonde hair who's sitting next to Amy Tenowich is possibly her sister Linda. This kid is wearing a plaid shirt and jeans, but is not necessarily a boy, although Amy is wearing a dress in this scene. And we get Mork doing his obligatory Peter Lorre imitation, although Mr. Weasel ends up speaking as Ed Sullivan. And the kids are very amused by the joke, There Goes the Neighborhood, which has its origins in racism. When non-white people would move to a neighborhood, bigots would say, there goes the neighborhood. I don't know if this happened in real life in those exact words, but it would be something that would pop up on sitcoms like All in the Family. Here, of course, it's literal that Mork is sitting on this model of a neighborhood. That joke aside, it's one of those things where, like, what was the budget they had to work with? Where did they get this nice little model neighborhood? Does Mindy know a realtor, maybe? Or maybe one of the daycare kids has a parent who's a realtor. This episode is not very shippy, as I'll discuss later, but I did notice that Mork has Mr. Weasel give Mindy a little peck on the cheek, which startles her. Mindy is going to teach the kids a lesson, so she has them gather around. She sits on the beanbag, and some of the kids sit next to her. Well, the kids from the top tier move down, and she wants them to repeat things after her.
I won't grow up. I won't grow up. I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to school. Just to learn to be a parrot. Just to learn to be a parrot. And recite a silly rule. And recite a silly rule. If growing up means it would be beneath my dignity to climb a tree, I'll never grow up, never grow up, never grow up. Not me. Not I. Not me. Not me. I won't grow up. I won't grow up. I don't want to wear a tie. I don't want to wear a tie. or a fraction of an inch. 'Cause growing up is awfuler than all the awful things that ever were. I'll never grow up, never grow up, never grow up. No, sir. Not me. No, sir. So there.
The song I Won't Grow Up is from the Peter Pan musical. Mary Martin is one of the people who sang it, and it is from the perspective of Peter Pan. Yes, Peter Pan was often played by a woman, and there is a lot of gender bending, having Mindy sing it while wearing a dress and presenting as female. The line about wearing a tie and not growing a mustache, and she says she's never going to be a man. And of course, both the boys and the girls are singing this along with her. When she stands up, the kids go back to their seats. She introduces the second movement of the Frog Lake Ballet. You may have noticed that so far Remo has hardly anything to do. At least Jeannie gets to do this silly dance with Mork. And we have the thing of her dying from smelling Mork's armpit, because of course you have to have a tragic death in a ballet, but it is tragic comic. And yes, Robin Williams would very memorably play the Frog Prince in a fairy tale theater episode with Terry Garr. And they dance well together. I swear, I remember when I first saw this, I thought, does Jeannie still have a crush on Mork? How does she feel about dancing with him? But it's not that shippy, it's just a cute little dance. Remo has an easel, and he says they'll get back to the show in just a moment, but first, this important message. And he wants to talk to them about a future leader of this country, although Nelson is not really running for a large office. And he says the graphics are courtesy of the Pine Tree Daycare Center. And I don't know if the daycare center will still have that name next season. The kids applaud themselves. Remo says that Nelson Flavor is a man of substance. So we see a picture of Nelson as a stick figure with glasses, a Winwood Flavor sign, and for some reason a hat. Remo says that Nelson has a vision of what America should be. So then we see a rough drawing of the U.S. sideways. Remo says to remember this face, so then we see Nelson as a clown with glasses. Remo says our future depends on it. And then we see that Remo snuck in and eat at the New York Deli signboard. Remo raises his eyebrows and says to tell your folks that Remo sent you. And I wasn't sure if this was a Groucho You Bet Your Life reference, because of the eyebrows. The kids clap as Remo exits with the board and easel. We fade to the next scene as the piano player starts playing what the subtitles call melancholy music. There's a tabletop with 3 bar taps, what those are called, spigots, some empty soda glasses. Bickley is dressed as an old-timey bartender. I would have said 1910 at the latest, maybe 1800s. And Mork is dressed as maybe a 1920s, 1930s kid. He's got knickers and knee socks, but also a sideways baseball cap, which is kind of 80s or 90s, really.
Give me another soda, Joe.
That's your 4th. Don't you think you had enough?
I'm drinking to forget, Joe.
Please, Billy, you know what it does to your complexion.
I don't care. I want to drown my sorrows.
Care to talk about it?
All right. It's this girl named Susie. She sits across from me in Miss Zimmerman's class.
You like her?
Maybe.
Does she like you?
Give me the soda.
I get it. A classic case of unrequited like.
Yeah, that's it. But the trouble is, well, she likes a guy named Mikey Farka Worka Worka War.
How do you know?
Well, she throws spitballs at him and calls him a Nene brain.
Want to know a secret, Billy? When I was your age, I liked someone too. Her name was Mary Lou. She was special. When I was with her, I felt 4 feet tall. I wanted to share everything I had with her. But she broke up with me because she didn't like what I gave her for Christmas.
Well, what'd you give her?
Chicken pox. Doggone, that's the way I like to see you, Billy.
Oh, thanks, Joy. I think I can make it now. Here you go, you big palooka. Buy yourself a Tonka toy.
So we've again got Mork doing a little kid voice, although it's not clear how old Billy is supposed to be. He is old enough to worry about his complexion, but when Mr. Bickley was his age, he wasn't 4 feet tall yet. There's spitballs, he's experiencing unrequited like, so let's just say preteens. I don't know. Oh, and chickenpox feels like something that a younger kid would get. And I thought that Big Palooka felt very era appropriate. It also made me think of him working on the Popeye movie around that same time. And Tonka was most famous for making trucks. And they're still in business after over 70 years. Mork returns wearing big blue sunglasses and his usual outfit, and I have no idea how he changes so fast. I mean, they should have done a little more of a transition.
Now do munchkins. You got it. Let's get down. Get back up again. We're gonna sing some music right now for you, but about things that make you feel bad. If something makes you feel bad, when I point my magic finger at you, you say, Shy Spot. That's why we're gonna wail the Shy Spot blues. Your mama tells you to cut out the sweets. Then she tells you to eat your beets. What's that make you feel, little one? You got it now. Don't jump fences. Don't climb trees. Don't sleep with a dog, or else you'll get fleas. What's this world full of, little munchies? We're on the roll now. Green veggies are good for you. Tell me how come they don't make ice cream stew? What's that we're talking about, you know? Yeah. You ask your mama if you came from the store. She said, no, little baby, you came from a test tube top with a cork. That's why I'm singing the blues.
It feels very of that era that the band that Mindy knows is wearing blindingly white suits. We have Mork again doing the blues and playing the harmonica. We have him saying Nanu Nanu Munchkins, and he does that joke that he's done before of get down, get back up again. Of course, they all know the term Shazbot and are happy to repeat that because it's like swearing in a clean way. And this is a song that is, again, at the kid level, and we have two examples of sweets versus veggies. At the same time, he throws in a mention of a test tube, which ties into his own origin and is not really something that the daycare kids would relate to. And then Nelson enters in a chicken costume, as they joked about, and he starts to read his speech, but he can't continue. He says this is the wrong time and place. They all helped him remember what it's like to be a kid again. He had the best morning of his entire life. Which I think is one of the saddest statements ever on Mork Mindy. I mean, it probably was fun, but my God, the best moment of your life and you're presumably pushing 30? Wow. He can't give his speech now and ruin all the fun. This gets him a standing ovation. He says, they love me, which is before Sally Field said, you like me, you really like me. And he says they're going to tell their parents. People are going to vote for this chicken yet. The other 5 cast enter, and they're all wearing red, white, and blue straw hats and vests. And Jeannie is still wearing part of her frog costume, although she's had plenty of time to change if Mork's gone through all these outfits. Remo links arms with Nelson and Jeannie. They all sing Glory, Glory, Nelson flavor instead of Hallelujah. His truth goes marching on. And then balloons start falling from the ceiling, and the kids try to hit them, which I thought was the most realistic child moment of the episode. And I noticed that Mork gets out Mr. Weasel, and it has him singing at the end. I don't know in what voice. There's a nighttime exterior of the house. Mork summons Orson, and by the end he's using his kid voice, so he calls Orson your Humpty Dumptiness, which not only is a fat joke, but ties in with the whole egg mythology of the series. In his normal voice, he says what he learned this week was teamwork. And then he sums up the plot, and he does a bit of the Tonight Show theme. Orson asks what Mork knows about children, although they should have discussed children ages ago, but fine, we'll transition into this. Mork prefers to think of them as humans. There's an old Earth phrase, children should be seen and not heard, but the silence would be deafening if that happened. Orson says children's minds aren't fully developed yet. Isn't it best they be kept in their place? Mork says just because they're children doesn't mean they don't have anything of value to say. You need to give them a chance and listen to them. If you're only going to talk down to them, how can you expect them to look up to you? And then, as Mr. Rogers, he says, can you say Nanu Nanu? I think you can. And the episode ends. Obviously, at the age of almost 12, this episode was very memorable to me at the time. Again, seeing some Gen X rep, watching them all perform. It's a bit like Shot's talent shows on Laverne and Shirley, and the many times that somebody is performing on Happy Days. We don't really get that as much on Mork and Mindy for various reasons. So this is their answer to that kind of let's put on a show episode. And I want to love it. There are some great moments here, but it just never quite gels. Again, this thing of, if Nelson didn't exist, could this episode have been done anyway? I mean, he's okay in this episode. It feels a bit contrived. I rate each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 egg scale, which measures how well it delivers what I'm looking for in the series. 2.5 seemed a bit cruel, 3 seemed a bit generous, so I'm going with a 2 3/4. It's enjoyable. It's not entertaining enough. It's not one of the episodes where we really learn much about the characters other than what their various talents are. It feels a little bit uneven that Remo doesn't really have to be here other than he plugs his deli. You know, they could have had Remo hosts and then he could have done jokes there. We could have had the end of his knock-knock joke routine and the kids booing him. Something. Mr. Bickley could have juggled as a bartender. I mean, it's just sort of thrown in. We have to assume that there were parts of that hour that we didn't get to see, but there's a lot of bait and switch kind of things. I thought that Gina Hecht and Robin Williams danced nicely. I thought Pam Dauber sang nicely. The blues number's pretty good. But it just didn't get to what I needed. There's the whole setup. It takes a while to get there. It also seems kind of pointless because if I remember correctly, in season 3, Nelson loses his campaign. How invested is anyone in it anyway? I mean, even on the show, most of the characters don't care. It often seems like Nelson barely cares. I guess the insight we get here is that he's doing politics out of insecurity, which is not a good motivation for many reasons. I also rate each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 heart scale, and like I said, this is just not shippy. The closest to a kiss is Mork has his Mr. Weasel, yes, that's suggestive, kiss Mindy. Mostly they're just part of the gang. Let's face it, Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland were not that romantic. There's not much to work with as a shipper here. Maybe because it is such a kid episode. It's just not even on the table. So I'm going with half a heart on that. I don't know that the episode's necessarily skippable. Obviously, I did use a lot of clips from it. I would say watch it with lowered expectations. You'll probably be entertained, but I don't think you'll be dazzled. But definitely there are worse episodes to come, and even worse episodes in this season. 2 3/4 eggs, half a heart. This is Paula Schaffner with episode 45, Looney Tunes and Morkie Melodies. Nanu, nanu. That's all, folks.
Miss Steele, the head of the Welfare Society here, is trying to get a petition with enough names on it to send us all to a state work school.
A work school?
What, are you kidding?
Can I go too, Ricky?
Oh, quiet, will you, Bob? She thinks we ought to be learning a trade or something instead of what we pick up in the theater. She's dead against show business.
That'd just be our chance to stick us away while our folks are on the road, wouldn't it? No, but we can't go on the road. No, we're too young. We're excess baggage. Listen, are you kids willing to stick together and pull yourselves out of a hole?
You bet.
I've got an idea. Our folks think we're babes in arms, huh? Well, we'll show them whether we're babes in arms or not. I'm going to write a show for us and put it on right here in Seaport. Why, it'll be the most up-to-date thing these hicks around here have ever seen. Opening night, we'll have Max Gordon, Sam Harris, Lee Schubert down to give us the once-over. How about it, kids? We'll get every kid in this town on our side, and we'll start right now. What do you say? Right now.